we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. State of the Nation. Yes, but it's me, Richard Tice Jacob. He's voting for the nation. I think he's literally speaking as I speak to you here and now. We've got a massive show, and we're going to be talking, of course, we've got the autumn statement on Wednesday that Jacob will be very focused on. Tax cuts. Are they going to happen or not? We've heard it all before. Will it actually happen? There he is, the great man. Live pictures. He's talking about his debanking amendment. The chamber looks rather empty, I'm concerned to see. We'll come back to that later with our fantastic panel. Of course, I also want to talk to the councillor who's calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, and to really grill him on that, because I got some pretty strong views on that. And then, can you believe it? Yes, teddy bears, trans teddy bears in schools, for heaven's sake, whatever next. But much more importantly than all of that, Jacob would be very focused on this. Do apostrophes actually matter? All that coming up after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good evening, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised tax cuts to boost economic growth and reward hard work ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy. Now inflation's been halved, but says any tax cuts will be made carefully and sustainably. He said his goals were to reduce debt, build sustainable energy and deliver world-class education.
We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
Boris Johnson's been heavily criticised by his former chief scientific advisor for the country's response during the pandemic. Sir Patrick Vallance described Boris Johnson as weak and indecisive in a daily diary entry and said the test and trace facilities were inadequate and the government's urgency during the crisis was at times inconsistent and unreliable. Sir Patrick said former Health Secretary Matt Hancock had a habit of saying things that weren't true, and he was asked if Boris Johnson was frequently bamboozled by scientific detail.
Certainly when I left a meeting, I would usually be persuaded that we had got him to understand what it was we were trying to say. But as one of the extracts showed that you put up there, that 6 hours later he might not have remembered what was in that presentation.
4 men have been convicted of murdering a woman who was shot with a machine gun in Liverpool. Ashley Dale died after being found with gunshot wounds in her garden in August last year. The 28-year-old was killed when James Witham forced his way into her home and opened fire. Sean Zeiss, Niall Barry and Joseph Peers were also found guilty of her murder. The Israeli city of Tel Aviv's come under a huge Hamas rocket attack. More than 100 separate alerts sounded across the city, stretching as far south as Ashdod. A number of the rockets fired from Gaza evaded Israel's Iron Dome defence system, although no injuries have been reported. Israeli airstrikes, though, are continuing in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says one such attack on a hospital earlier killed at least 12 Palestinians. Former Manchester City defender Benjamin Mendy's launched a multi-million-pound claim against the club over unpaid wages. The 29-year-old who left City over the summer alleges he wasn't paid after being charged with rape and sexual assault in 2021. The France international was cleared of all charges. In August, the High Court heard Mendy was selling his house in a bid to avoid bankruptcy as he battles against an £800,000 tax bill from HMRC. This is GB News. We're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now it is back to Richard.
Thank you, Aaron, and welcome everybody to State of the Nation just after 8 o'clock. And Jacob is working hard. Yes, he's in the House of Commons. He's speaking as we speak. And he is talking about his debanking amendment. So, of course, it's pretty important he's there as he's actually introduced this amendment. Big day on Wednesday, the autumn statement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. There is Jacob. He's still going. I mean, he doesn't hold back, as you well know. I think he may have just sat down. Disappointing, the chamber looks a little bit empty. But anyway, I'm sure it'll be absolutely full to the gunnels on Wednesday, listening to whether or not the Chancellor is actually going to try and kickstart some economic growth, some activity to get this country moving again, because at the moment we're in a sort of stalemate situation. Now, I've got some pretty clear views about how you do that. I think you've actually got to reduce taxes, you've got to get people to be able to spend their own money, you've got to cut taxes for the lowest paid, the least well off, for small businesses to encourage them to take risk. If you reduce things like VAT, consumer taxes, mathematically, inflation falls. Mathematically. These, I think, are the things that actually get an economy moving. But someone who knows huge amounts about economic affairs is, of course, Vicky Price, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. And I'm delighted that Vicky's with me now in the studio. Vicky, thanks for joining us. So 2 days to go. This is when you're manic on the media discussing what may or may not happen. But look, the economy is flatlining. We're not doing well. The Eurozone's doing probably worse than us. We need some growth. People have talked about growth before. I'm very focused on growth. How is the Chancellor, given the constraints he's got, going to give us some conditions for growth and to make people feel better off?
Well, you mentioned businesses before, and I think you're quite right. What he needs to do is give a bit of encouragement so that businesses can go out and invest, but also do something about their costs, because not only do they have problems with staff, they can't find it, and it's very expensive, particularly since we left the EU, but also business rates, which had been going up quite significantly. There was a freeze last year, and I think the important thing is for the smaller firms in particular to see that continuing, so that we can have still a high street, so that retailers don't just close shop, the small ones, so that there are still firms around that employ people. And yet what we've seen so far is that insolvencies are at the highest level right now than they were back in the financial crisis.
Because, of course, we've seen so many costs for small businesses going up and up, whether it's business rates, whether it's energy, whether it's labour costs. It's difficult out there. We get that. But they're so worried about inflation. But look, inflation is reducing. I would argue, frankly, not much due to their effect, more to do with energy costs, but that's a sort of separate debate. But it is coming down. But am I right that if you reduce taxes for the lowest paid, you get the greatest multiplier effect as the money that they spend sort of percolates through the economy and creates a bit of growth?
Yes, but you need to do it in the right way, of course, so that you don't penalise them in different ways. So you have to be very careful. So if we reduce, for example, the basic rate of income tax, you do very, very little for those at the lower end of the pay scale. But if you continue to freeze personal allowances and they get a little bit of an increase, then they start paying tax. So for the first time ever, and we've already seen more than 2 million people suddenly paying tax, which they didn't pay before. We've seen 1.2 million, I think it is, paying the higher rate. So you have to watch it. But you're right on the multiplier, because people at the lower end tend to spend much more of their income, in fact, all of it, on goods and services. People higher up save.
But I would do it properly. I wouldn't muck about. I think you need some proper action. I would increase the threshold before anybody starts paying income tax from about 12.5 grand. Actually, my view is you should increase it to 20 grand. You take 6 million people out of paying income tax. There's no chance they'll do that. But they might do a bit. I mean, that is the quickest, fastest way to help those on low incomes. And there's also this conflict that people have to look at. Conflict's the wrong word, but trap, where those who are trapped in benefits because it doesn't pay to work relative to the income tax threshold. So that's where they've got to make some progress.
Yes, and it gets much more complicated further down, because if you reduce tax and suddenly they pay less tax, then the means testing that they get to get the universal credit penalises them. So they don't even benefit from it. That's why I'm saying that you have to be very, very careful how those tax cuts, if there are indeed tax cuts, are administered in reality, so they don't end up with the poorest in our population actually doing worse rather than better.
My fear also is that he may come up with all sorts of complicated, interventionist, big state sort of things, that, you know, in terms of sort of all these expense allowances for business and things. They all sound very good when you talk about them, but they're incredibly complicated and don't help ordinary folk on the street.
It is actually rather helpful to have some certainty on the investment front. So I think this expensing, full expensing, which basically means that you can use the money that you're going to be spending on plant and machinery, and also I think on some IT investments, you can use that and put it against your profits in year one rather than have to do it over a number of years. It's actually good news. Having, though, something which is only temporary means that all you do is you bring investment forward, and over a 5-year period, there's no real difference.
So that's good for big businesses, but lots of small businesses haven't really got the money to invest in that sort of plant and equipment, have they?
It's true, but of course, quite a lot of smaller businesses do different things. They don't invest in these areas. That's why, you know, looking at exactly what is allowable is a very, very important thing. And maybe that can be made clearer so that companies can see that, let's say, IT investment on doing something really interesting in terms of the way they deliver their services may be something which requires investment, which they can get everybody. It's not as expensive as it looks. That's the interesting thing. Everyone's talking about it costing about 10 billion a year. But in reality, if you look at the fact that you don't actually have demands for capital allowances when you have that, and you net it out, it becomes very cheap.
And he's obviously got politics at play here. He's in the last year before an election. What do you think might be the big headline grabber that excites people?
It's so interesting you ask this, because, of course, they've been trying everything. I mean, in this particular pre-autumn statement period, we had so many different things which are being thrown out, and then they're withdrawn a little bit because nobody's reacting positively to this. So inheritance tax looked like it was good, it was going to be relatively cheap to do, and would satisfy people from the political front, you know, and conservative voters possibly. But I think if you were to not continue freezing personal tax allowances in the right way, as I said, but take that away, which is a huge tax increase for ordinary people, then that would be the main thing.
That could be the big headline grabber. Thank you very much indeed, Vicky Price, for that. Absolutely fascinating. Only a day and a half to wait. So we move back to, of course, the very controversial issue of the protests, the ceasefire debate with regard to the Israel and Hamas war. Well, a councillor in Kingston, southwest London, he's written a letter. He's got pretty strong views on this as well. An open letter to some 19,000 government officials, I think councillors, across the whole of the UK. And so I'm very pleased to be joined now by James Giles, the independent councillor for Kingston, on this. James, I mean, this is quite a thing for you to do, to write to some 19,000 councillors up and down the country calling for a ceasefire. Why have you done it? Why do you think that this is the right way forward?
Well, look, A number of councillors in isolation, in silos, have been writing letters to their party leaders. You know, the vast majority of councillors represent parties. But in a silo, it so often gets lost in this busy media environment. And so my endeavour, together with Conservative councillor Jamal Chauhan, who co-wrote the letter, is to provide, if you like, a national voice on this issue, from representatives locally to national leaders from all parties and none. And actually, we've got already, in just a day, over 500 signatures from Conservative councillors, Labour, Liberal Democrat, you name it, of all the small parties, all parties and none, actually coming together on this issue which transcends the political divide.
But obviously, the call for a ceasefire, we've seen lots of protests in London and elsewhere about it. And look, everybody wants peace. Everyone wants to stop the killing to stop. But let's be honest, you know, a one-sided ceasefire where Israel basically is asked for a ceasefire but is left with one hand tied behind its back when you've got Hamas basically saying they still want to kill all Jews, they want to obliterate Israel, and they're still pouring rockets over the border. I mean, that's not a ceasefire, that's surrender.
Well, let's be quite clear, first and foremost. Unequivocally, Hamas are a terrorist organisation. The atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th were deplorable. Having said that, Israel need to be held accountable for their obligations under international law, under the Geneva Convention, and the collective punishment of innocent civilians, women and children in Gaza cannot be excused, and we cannot absolve Israel of any responsibility.
No, of course, and they're well aware of that because there's huge diplomatic pressure, and I think there's hope as we speak that some hostages may be released. But look, the reality is we're also seeing videos come out from the IDF that the Al-Shifa hospital, where you've got tunnels under there, and it's quite clear that Hamas themselves are breaching international law. They are using civilians, Palestinian civilians and children as human shields. And I come back to this point. A one-sided ceasefire is not a ceasefire. It's surrender.
I agree wholeheartedly with you.
So how do you get Hamas to agree to a ceasefire, which, by the way, they've never done before? In fact, there was a ceasefire before October the 7th. And then what do you think should happen to Hamas after the ceasefire starts?
Well, look, the vast majority of people in this country, the vast majority of people around the world, the vast majority of governments around the world are calling for a bilateral ceasefire. Shouldn't need to say bilateral. By virtue of the term ceasefire, it is bilateral. Of course, it would be perverse for me to call for a ceasefire only on one side. It'd be perverse for anyone to call for one side to stop hostilities.
We agree on that, yeah?
Yes, absolutely, wholeheartedly. And what we are asking our political leaders to do is to exert their influence, their weight, their leadership and the political imagination to help bring about a ceasefire, as the vast majority of governments are doing together with the United Nations.
And in order to do that, what do you think should happen to Hamas? They've governed Gaza for the last 18 years. After one round of elections, they murdered all their opponents afterwards. No elections ever since. Do you think that it's credible, or is it actually naive to think that Hamas can continue to govern Gaza?
Well, let me make clear at this point, the letter calls for a humanitarian ceasefire. So on this, I speak to you giving my personal view as a councillor, as opposed to on behalf of all of those who have signed the open letter. But, you know, there's the US calling for the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza after the conflict, and God willing, there'll be a ceasefire soon. There's a question, frankly, I think, over whether the Palestinian Authority will even be in control of the West Bank at the end of this conflict. That's a whole other matter.
But to finish...
The way I see it is that if the UN can come in, use their way, and as we speak, negotiations are ongoing between Israel and Hamas, facilitated by the US and UN, to bring them in and to stop this endless killing of innocent civilians.
Do you agree that actually going forward, in order for peace to be enduring, that actually Hamas have to stop governing Gaza?
Look, I want personally the UN to step in following this conflict.
So we do agree on that?
I believe we do, yes.
Do you think that's possible?
I do believe it is possible, but only through diplomacy.
Only through diplomacy. James, I love your optimism. It's a really, really difficult topic. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. That's James Giles, who has called... he's not only called for a ceasefire, but he's actually written to 19,000 councillors up and down the country. Look, we all want peace, It's just you cannot have a one-sided ceasefire. Coming up, my friends, a man's been deported to Somalia after committing brutal crimes here in the UK, but only after years and years going through the courts at great expense to you and all of us. The question is, so should we deport foreign criminals before or after serving the sentences? All of that coming up here on State of the Nation.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with Israel.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GBNews.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends, to State of the Nation. I'm Richard Tice. Jacob is probably still speaking in the House of Commons. He's doing a serious job. He's probably trying to get people to vote for the nation. I've got your thoughts. Lots of mail mogs pouring in. Ian says, Richard, surely the ULEZ charges have a massive impact on small businesses as extra direct trading costs and lower sales due to the reduced footfall in our towns and cities. Ian, you are absolutely spot on. I'm campaigning against ULEZ. You heard it earlier on the Farage show. Unbelievable. The NHS spending 65 million quid on ULEZ-compliant ambulances. Just drives me mad. Steve says, Richard, cut taxes, cut prices, make fuel cheaper, pile it high and sell it cheap. Do you know what? That used to be the slogan of a very large supermarket group. I better not say who, they might have a bit of a strop at me. Anyway, we're going to move on now because a Somali migrant has finally been deported. Years and years of going through the criminal justice system after serious crimes, reportedly costing you and I £1 million in fees, legal fees and the like. So my big question is, Should we deport foreign criminals once they've been convicted before or after serving the sentences? It's a really serious question. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Professor Anthony Glees, who is an intelligence and security expert on this. Anthony, look, when we hear these cases of people who've finished their sentences and then we can't deport them because of all sorts of appeals and human rights challenges and this and that at all of our expense, I mean, it drives the population, quite rightly, absolutely tonto, frankly. Why do we keep them here at all to serve their sentences? Why not just save a load of cash, save a load of prison spaces and send them straight back to where they came from day one when they're convicted, Anthony?
Well, I think the reason that people who've committed egregious crimes, as Mr. Ahmed had done, should serve their sentences in the UK is so that justice is not only done but can be seen to be done. You know, he was accused of an awful rape together with 2 others. His victims would be appalled, I think, if he had been deported straight to Somalia and perhaps nothing would have happened to him there. So he would get off scot-free. We'd be paying his airfare. And those people who feel that he should have served time for the awful things that he did to them would feel extremely upset about that. So it's right that people should serve sentences here. What's not right in this particular case, which really is an awful case, he went through 24 tribunals and courts, and finally he was put on a plane in 2018. His fellow passengers made a fuss and forced the authorities to take him off the plane because they felt that he was being unfairly deported. That illustrates one problem here, which is there are a lot of people in this country who think they've got an opinion that's worth taking note of, when actually they understand nothing. He didn't tell them he was being deported because he was a rapist. And they, you know, interfered. The authorities seem to have backed off. And I think that's the second problem here, which is that...
But that was 5 years ago. Whatever those passengers on that plane may have thought, you know, for it to go on another 5 years, I mean, the whole system is... It's in favour of the criminal and not us, the decent law-abiding citizens.
Well, I think that certainly people need to have a fair crack of the whip, but I think most people would say £1 million on somebody who's been convicted of rape is a bridge too far. And the other thing, though, is that the Home Secretary always used to have the power to deport people in this country whose presence was deemed by the Home Secretary to be unconducive to the public good. Well, Mr. Yaqub Ahmed is clearly somebody whose presence in the United Kingdom is not conducive to the public good. He was allowed to come here and granted asylum, as I think he was 15 years old or something like that. That was perfectly fair. But the moment he was convicted of rape, he should have been deported at once. There ought to be an automatic...
Anthony, I suspect and I'm fascinated by viewers and listeners' thoughts on this. Really important. Do you think that actually they should be straight out the moment they're convicted, or serve their time here, preferably full-time, not some sort of half-time, and then straight on the next plane out literally that day?
Yes,
Anthony, time is against us. I'm so grateful for your thoughts on that, but I want your views in mailbogs. Straight out, or do your time and then straight out? Now, I'm delighted to be joined by my absolutely outstanding panel here to discuss a range of things. But first of all, of course, we must discuss Jacob, because he's in the House of Commons talking about debanking. Now, there's a serious situation. So Amy Nicol-Turner, author and broadcaster, is with me, unusually on the right here, and Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Jacob's sister, who was with me in the Brexit party some 4 years ago, unusually on the left. Welcome to you both. So Jacob he's talking about debanking in the House of Commons. The cases, I mean, they're just mad. So you've got Barclays closing the bank account of a GP's surgery in Hertfordshire because some technical details weren't there. I mean, Where's the common sense in all of this, Amy? We hear this week in, week out.
With this example, the devil's in the detail, and I don't feel you've entirely covered that, because the reason that this happened was because the bank was repeatedly told that they needed to change some, they needed to provide some signatures, right? They didn't provide them in time, which has to be provided to keep in financial regulation. So it would become a security risk. So Barclays was actually protecting them by closing down this account for this amount of time. The NHS offered a bridging loan to cover it. This is more a case of poor admin on their behalf. But I can see why they've got poor admin, because GP surgeries at the moment are completely overstretched.
They're busy places.
I mean, they're lucky to be open. The amount of GP surgeries that have been closed over the past few years. And I think this is just actually not a case of debanking, which is a serious issue. In the case of low-income people, in the case of sex workers, it's a case of poor admin.
Poor admin.
This one.
Hold that thought. I think we can go to Jacob to see what he's been thought about this. We've got a clip of Jacob on this.
So once you start saying that you can be debanked for holding Nigel Farage's views, what about being in favour of Scottish independence? Would that be a view that one bank might not like and would say that members of the SNP, a perfectly legal party, should not be banking with them? It affects every political opinion, and your political opinion may of today be fashionable, but tomorrow it may not be. And we always have to consider in legislation the protection of free speech against the interests of passing fashion, because we may be the ones, and opposition members may be the ones, who are affected by it in a slightly different or changed environment.
There we are. There's Jacob. I have to say, Annunziata. I mean, he is brilliant in the House of Commons. But there's a difference, isn't there, between being debanked for your political views and this case that Amy was clarifying, helpfully, that this was more an administration point.
It was an administration point, and they did ignore numerous messages from Barclays.
They thought they were a scam.
But they thought they were a scam. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people, not necessarily offices and GP surgeries, but there are a lot of people who are very worried about any communication is some kind of fraud. And can we have your signature and your details? And they'd go, oh, it must be fake. And perhaps the banks really need to think about how they communicate with people so that people don't make that kind of mistake and don't lose their
Absolutely. I basically
ability to have a backup.
assume that almost everything like that is a fake, whether it's a text or a phone call. You're really worried now. We really are. And so it's a serious challenge, which sort of didn't exist, I guess, 15, 20 years ago. I'm showing my age, aren't I? But it's a real issue for the banks, isn't it, Amy?
Yeah, definitely, especially with this whole... Have you heard about the Dear Mum scams, where people are getting hold of parents' numbers and being, can you just transfer me this to my account? I've borrowed someone's phone. That one's really scary. But debanking is a problem, right? This is a bad example, but if we look at people who cannot open bank accounts because they don't have the income yet to do so, and they are pushed out of the banking sector, people with certain professions aren't allowed bank accounts. I'm glad Jacob's bringing this up, but I don't think we needed to have the high-profile case of Nigel to have it pointed out. It should have been in the news before that.
It should have been in the news, but actually sometimes it takes a high-profile case in order to grab the attention, because you sort of think it's... And people are quite embarrassed when you get debanked. I mean, I've had a couple of accounts closed, and various other people have. I mean, you feel a bit embarrassed saying, oh, because everyone assumes you've run out of cash.
Yes, absolutely. And this GP surgery has had to go around apologising to suppliers that why they can't pay them. But once upon a time, up until Vince Cable scrapped it, everyone had a right to a bank account. And you could have a post office account.
So it's Vince's fault.
So
Hold that thought. Not here to defend himself. But Barclays, we just need to say what they said. They were obviously contacted. They said, we're required to keep up-to-date information regarding our customers' accounts. And as part of our ongoing responsibility to help prevent financial crime, to meet our obligations, regulatory obligations, the mandate has been updated and the reopening of the business accounts has already commenced and will be finalised. Look, that's all very well, but I just think we've got to apply a bit more common sense. And maybe between the businesses and the banks, we've got to find a way so that people can actually do this quickly. Anyway, thanks to my brilliant panel. They'll be coming up after the break. We'll be asking, is there such a thing as a transgender teddy bear? And if so, should primary schools be taught about them? All of that and much, much more here on State of the Nation.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, my friends, to State of the Nation with me, Richard Tice, standing in for Jacob, who is hard at work in the House of Commons trying to get his amendment on debanking through. Now, your thoughts. The Mail-Mog's Bob says, Richard, keep them in the UK so that victims know that they serve their sentence. Otherwise, repatriating them may allow them to go free. Will the receiving country want to pay for them? Well, we don't want to pay for them either. Or will we end up doing a prisoner swap? Good thoughts there, Bob, and I suspect that may be the majority. John says New Zealand citizens who live in Australia that commit dreadful crimes are deported. What's not clear, though, John, is whether that's before or after. That's the critical thing. I think that probably is right, that actually the victims want to know the sentence has been served. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Now, the great teddy bear debate has begun because, yes, trans ideology, what's being discussed in schools using teddy bears. Now, I'm pleased to say we have got a teddy bear here, which is on my desk. And now, it's interesting because it's, if you look at it like that, it's like a tie. It's like Jacob, really, whereas if you lift it, then it's more like a skirt. It's more sort of like, I mean, it's the Rees-Mogg teddy bear, so therefore it's more like an Enunciata. How do we think about that? Sorry. Before we go to my guests, let's just look at this clip here from the charity No Outsiders, that apparently they're using this in hundreds of schools. Just watch this.
If I tell you, said Thomas, you might not be my friend anymore. I'll always be your friend, Thomas. Thomas the teddy took a deep breath. I need to be myself, Errol. In my heart, I've always known that I'm a girl teddy, not a boy teddy. I wish my name was Tilly, not Thomas.
Here is the bear. Well, I think a teddy bear should just stay being a teddy bear. Amy Nicole Turner, look, I mean, seriously, this is... where do we go with this? Why do we need to teach children that they can question their gender, their sex, at such a young age? Surely that's not right for children who should be learning to read, to write, a bit of history, and to have a bit of fun in the playground.
I think we should start with the true message of the book, which is about kindness and understanding and being who you are. And I don't think you're teaching children anything other than the truth. I think the use of the term gender ideology is problematic because it suggests that gender identity isn't as immutable as biological sex. You have biological sex, you have your gender identity, they're both valid and they're both immutable. So it might be the case that you are born with a male body, but you know you are a female. It's that simple. I don't know why you feel the need to overcomplicate it all the time when all we're trying to say is introduce to children that they might have a family member who is trans, they might have a sibling that is trans, they might themselves be trans. It's just a really simple, lovely way of introducing a type of identity that actually it experiences disproportionate amounts of mental health struggles, discrimination,
but these are
hate
children at
crimes.
primary school,
Exactly,
Amy.
So it's the perfect time to say, let's be accepting.
No, surely. Let's see what Annunziata thinks about that. Look, these are children in primary school. They should be learning all the things that I've just touched on. Isn't it confusing to children to say, well, you were born a girl, but if you feel like it, for this week, you could be a boy?
That's not what the book says.
I think it is both confusing and also distrusts our children, that actually I think the least judgmental people in the world pretty much are 5-year-olds who just take anyone at face value, and if you're quite nice, they'll like you, and if you're not, they won't. And there you go. They couldn't care less if you're, anything if you're a zombie, they'd go, oh, but they're quite a nice zombie. It's all fine. They don't judge. And it's adults that teach them to make assumptions about people. But also, I'm very worried from a feminist point of view. What happens to the ability to be a tomboy? Is that a girl who actually wants to be a boy because she's doing boy things? No, that is a girl who likes climbing trees and being out in the mud, which is absolutely fine. And we should accept that and stop throwing down children's throats that they are in the wrong body, when actually anybody can do anything and be who they want to be.
You're conflating gender identity with gender expression. You could be a tomboy and be a trans man.
We are pushing children to believe they're in the wrong body.
If you ask most parents, and I'm doing events up and down the country, and this, I think, is the thing that is winding parents up more and more. If you ask most parents, they will say there are two sexes and two genders, and that is it.
But can you see how there could be a mismatch there?
No, I think that's pretty clear. I think that's pretty simple to use your expression.
Well, then you're not looking at the complexity of human existence.
And we shouldn't be throwing that down young children's throats.
How many people in your constituency you might be speaking
I'm talking to parents up and down the country in dozens of constituencies who are fuming that third-party providers are coming into our primary schools and secondary schools and sort of essentially confusing children.
But it's not confusing children, is it? It's just introducing the diversity of human experience that they might interact with at some point in their lives. Today is the day of transgender remembrance, and you're choosing a day like this to again attack the trans community. We should be talking and celebrating about the good and the enriched culture that we have.
That's fine when you're adults, but not when you're children.
But these children might meet trans people. They might have them in their family, like I've already said. What's the point of not telling? And also, fundamentally, do you know what you can really do? If you go and look up the book, and look at the reviews of the book, there's hundreds of reviews of people that have actually bought and read the book, rather than just denigrate the book based on a tiny clip. And everyone says what a fantastic, heartwarming book it is. It's a positive message. Let's not find negative in something.
Why don't we let children be children and leave all the politics and the identities out of it? I think you've done a fantastic job tonight. I mean, how many people are you tonight, Richard?
I'm identifying as all sorts of people, but every time I'm a male. That's
they are all male. Well, perhaps you need more women on GB News.
But you can't seem to get past that. You are a gender-conforming man. Clearly, you know your gender identity in the same way a trans person knows their gender identity. So why, when you don't question your own, do you question theirs?
I think the issue is adults are adults, but confusing children in primary schools, I think, is completely wrong. The government's got a review about it that they said back in March would be urgent about what's taught in schools. It's now November, no sign of this review. I just think it's wrong.
What you're calling for is a Section 28 reprisal.
What I'm calling for is that you shouldn't be teaching, you shouldn't be confusing children about their sexual identity when they are children.
Again, you're confusing so many things. Your sexual identity and your gender identity are two completely different things.
You're either a boy or a girl, and you're born in a body, and that's who you are.
And you have your gender identity and your biological sex.
And they're one and the same thing.
You need to differentiate between what's between your legs and what's in your head. And
they're one and the same thing.
I want to quote my friend Benjamin Butterworth, because he said he learned about World War II at school and he's yet to invade Poland. It's the same thing. Having an awareness.
There's a real concern about these bodies going into primary schools and influencing children without seemingly any real oversight. And some of the charities have aims that I don't think the majority of the British public would support and don't believe are part of British values. And I think we need to really look at that.
I agree entirely, but it's a big, controversial debate. My panel is sparking up, just warming up. Anyway, coming up after the break. Now, I think we've contacted No Outsiders for comment, but we haven't heard back. But there's still time, don't worry. Anyway, coming up, despite the axing of HS2, this is unreal. Just unreal. They're continuing to prove their inefficiency and waste your and my cash. They're still buying properties north of Birmingham. And the most divisive debate to reach these shores, the question of, Jacob will be really wound up about this, apostrophes. All of that. Don't go anywhere.
On Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, is society too afraid of offending the Muslim community? Are schools indoctrinating kids using transgender teddy bears? We'll hear from both sides on that disturbing story. Plus, do Harry and Meghan deserve an invite to Christmas at Sandringham? The Mail on Sunday, Charlotte Griffiths offers her expert analysis. And tune in for the most exciting paper review anywhere on the telly with Kelvin Mackenzie tucking in to tomorrow's headlines. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11. Be there.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends, to the last segment of State of the Nation. Here I am, of course, identifying... Who am I identifying at the moment? I'm Richard Tice. Jacob is working hard in the House of Commons. We've got your thoughts. Joan says, what are you talking about? Teddy bears were always transgender. That's Joan's thoughts. Amy will be happy with that. Victoria says, what we should be asking is how this corruption has got into schools. Sunak's now talking about making our schools the best in the world. Well, he's an awful long way to go with education at the bottom. My concern is that Sunak promised an urgent review back in March. My definition of urgent is today or at the end of this week at the latest. His is clearly about 9 or 12 months. Anyway, talking of urgent, that brings me nicely on to the topic of HS2, where the Prime Minister made a big announcement at his party conference in Manchester that he was scrapping the northern part from Birmingham to Manchester of HS2. Frankly, I'd have scrapped the whole wretched thing. It's been the biggest waste of money I suspect any of us have ever seen. But it comes back to this question of urgent. So that was back at, I think, the beginning of October. It's now mid-November. Here we are. And weeks later, they're still buying properties north of Birmingham. The highest paid civil servant, I think in the land actually, is the boss, the chief exec of HS2, earning over 600 grand. Look, I'm in the property business. If someone said to me, we're scrapping this project, you don't need any more properties north of this location, I'd tell the team, end of, cancel it, scrap the lawyers, tell them it's over. What's going on here? Amy, I mean, how can it be that weeks and weeks later they're still buying, it seems, over 100 properties from people north of Birmingham?
I think the issue is that they put in these compulsory purchase orders before they knew they were going to scrap it, so they kind of... But the thing is, don't you remember around the time of these compulsory purchase orders that people were saying no to HS2 and they didn't want to sell their houses? But then I think perhaps what happened was they were offered such a massive fee for their house that now they kind of want to go through with it, and it's more about...
There's a whole valuation process, but...
So, because the plans are put in place, but maybe those people could be in a chain...
It's not a good use of taxpayers' cash.
It's not, but is it unavoidable? I don't know. I mean, I think they should have finished it.
You think they should have finished it? That's a whole other topic. We haven't got an hour.
In 2010.
Annunciata.
Amy's absolutely right. The reason they have given is that they are so big-hearted that they don't want to spoil the chains of the sales so that other people's houses fall through. Well, that's jolly nice of them.
Jolly nice.
It's on the taxpayers' pay, and it's absolutely ridiculous. The cost of this, 201 properties, if you just take the average cost of an English house or property, it's 290,000. You're at 58 million. I'm going to assume because of the location, some of them are worth quite a lot more than that. It's a huge amount of money that is being thrown after bad money at a point at which we need to cut our losses.
They aren't there, the government that do throw money. Did you see the Sunday headline in the Mirror? 100 billion wasted over the last 4 years. I mean, this is kind of a pity.
Well, that's why I keep saying we've got to cut government waste. But surely, I mean, sadly, lots of property chains, they break down. But you shouldn't be wasting tens and tens of millions of taxpayers' cash. It's absolutely insane, if you ask me. But it's a failure of the management team. They're the ones who should be saying, stop it, scrap it, we're done. We're not buying any more properties north of Birmingham. Anyway, now, well, that's the HS2 chat, although Amy you'd have liked to build the whole thing.
Of course.
What?
It's such an outlier. This is when the moment HS2 was denounced. It's like levelling up. Really did show it for the political slogan that it was. We're levelling down. We're like...
but that's exactly the point. All you do is make it faster for people to come down to London. What we should have been doing is building regional infrastructure, east-west infrastructure in the north, and that's all now been gone because they've wasted tens of billions on this absurd vanity project.
If they'd have just sped it up, planned it properly, and done it within budget, it might have been OK. It's only because it got so delayed.
Yeah, but you know full well, Amy, that we're not very good, are we, Annunziata, at building things quickly on budget in the public sector?
Not very good is very kind of you. We're appalling.
Well, I mean, we simply are. It's just, I don't know, it's just not good enough. But whenever we waste all this money, it drives me absolutely just furious, because we could be cutting taxes for the lowest paid. Instead, they've just wasted all of this cash. Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Annunziata. Great to see you. I hope I've done a reasonable job identifying as your brother for the hour.
Wonderful.
Now, but really importantly, I mean, you think that's divisive? You think teddy bears are divisive? The most divisive story of all, Jacob's concern about apostrophes. Winchester City Council. Yes, locals have beat the council to reinstate apostrophes in the street name in Twyford, St Mary's Terrace in Twyford. We asked the British people how important apostrophes are. Do they matter?
Apostrophes, if they're not in the right position on a note, it can alter it completely. If you leave them out and they put them in where they want to, it can make a statement totally different than what you mean.
Well, they are when you're writing a text or writing, yes.
Important because it's like a meaning of something. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. Because it's basic English, isn't it?
It is pretty much basic English, basically, yeah.
Welcome back. Well, there's some thoughts on apostrophes. I look forward to your thoughts. I wonder, I mean, I suspect that you were a genius at English literature and English at school, so you're very concerned about apostrophes,
Well,
Patrick.
it's funny you should say that, because this book that I'm holding up here is about my level of reading, Richard. It is, of course,
the Teddy Bear book.
Introducing Teddy. I'm going to be talking about that. We've got a big clash on this tonight as to whether or not this book that sees Teddy turn into Tilly is indoctrinating primary school children, or rather teachers are doing it. Would you pull your kid out of school if you realised they were being taught about gender ideology? So we're going to be talking a lot about
Well, this Teddy here, I identified briefly as Jacob and then briefly as Annunziata.
Oh, really?
Well, we thought it's the Rees-Mogg Teddy.
It is? Well, there you go. Did Nanny give it to you?
That is harsh. Amy thinks I've got this all wrong about this teaching of gender ideology in schools. I have to say, I'm really concerned about it. I think the vast, vast majority of parents are seriously concerned about it.
The thing is, it's not just about this book, is it? It's about the more aggressive stuff as well. Just very, very quickly, I'm also going to be having a big debate with an ex-BBC employee and a prominent member of the British Jewish community about whether there needs to be an investigation there. And I am asking if we are too afraid of offending certain elements of the British Muslim community, and Just Stop Oil just got nicked, didn't they? So we've got all sorts on the show.
All sorts coming up. The question is, they might have been nicked, but are they going to be charged, and are they actually going to spend some time in the clink, which is where I think they should be?
I think they'll be back again tomorrow.
Oh, dear, here we go. Anyway, thanks for all that. It's going to be a great, fantastic show. We've had lots of fiery debates here. I'll be back tomorrow night. See you then.
Hello again. A window of fine weather to come over the next 24 hours. That is, once any further showers have eased overnight. A lot of cloud continuing at first, but then clearing skies are arriving from the north and northwest as a ridge of high pressure builds in from the northwest. But still, we've got low pressure close by. That's continuing to bring some cloud and some rain or showers, especially across eastern parts of the country. Eastern Scotland seeing those showers push into eastern England overnight. A lot of low cloud associated with these showers as well. Some showers continuing across north and west Wales, parts of southwest England as well, but these will ease. So for many, it's turning drier and clearer overnight. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing a frost by dawn with -2 to -4 Celsius in some sheltered spots. But that's where we'll have the brightest of the skies first thing. Scotland and Northern Ireland, plenty of fine weather through the morning. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, especially East Anglia and the southeast, where there'll be some mist and fog first thing, with some showery rain continuing into the afternoon. 12 Celsius here, but crisp autumn sunshine elsewhere, 8 to 10 degrees generally. However, for parts of Scotland, it turns cloudier later, and that's ahead of some wet and windy weather sweeping in for Wednesday. That rain affecting predominantly Scotland, but there'll be some dribs and drabs of rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England as well. Further south, a largely dry day on Wednesday with increasingly cloudy and breezy weather later. Rain sinking south on Thursday, followed by colder conditions by Friday.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GBNews.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't